This video is brought to you by Brilliant. For the past year or so, there's been a sense inside Turkey that incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's time might finally be coming to an end. The economy is still a mess. His AK party were beaten for the first time at last year's local elections, and polling had consistently put the presumptive opposition candidate, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, ahead of Erdogan for the next presidential election. However, earlier this week, Turkish police suddenly detained İmamoğlu, renewing Turkey's economic crisis and fears about democratic backsliding in the country. So in this video, we're going to look at Erdogan's ongoing crackdown on the opposition, why it's happening now, and why it could be yet more bad news for Turkey's ailing economy. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's just start by explaining what's happened over the past few days. On Wednesday, Turkish police detained İmamoğlu, with Turkish state media claiming İmamoğlu's detention was part of an investigation into alleged terrorism links between İmamoğlu and a pro-Kurdish political group that apparently supported his 2024 mayoral campaign. This isn't the first time İmamoğlu has been investigated, but it's by far the most serious charge yet, and the first time it's looked like İmamoğlu might actually be hauled off to jail. The timing is also somewhat suspicious. İmamoğlu's arrest came the day after Istanbul University suddenly withdrew his higher education degree, which would disqualify him from entering the presidential race, and just a few days before he was supposed to be crowned the CHP's candidate for the next presidential election, which is due in 2028. For context, the CHP are the main opposition party in Turkey, and polling currently suggests that İmamoğlu would beat Erdogan in a head-to-head vote. While the CHP lost the 2023 presidential election to Erdogan, this was largely because their candidate, old-timer Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, wasn't particularly popular, and polling at the time suggested that both İmamoğlu and the mayor of Ankara, Mansur Yavaş, would have beaten Erdogan. In local elections last year, when Kılıçdaroğlu was off the ballot, the CHP performed remarkably well, with both Yavaş and İmamoğlu winning in Ankara and Istanbul respectively. Unsurprisingly, the CHP have said that İmamoğlu's arrest was politically motivated, and their chair described it as a coup against our next president. In some sense, this is the continuation of a crackdown that began at the start of this year. In January, for instance, Turkish authorities jailed the leader of the ultra-nationalist Victory Party for insulting Erdogan and inciting hatred with anti-refugee posts on social media. But things really stepped up a notch in February, when the authorities suddenly detained about 300 people, including opposition officials, journalists, and even an astrologer who'd strayed into election predictions. Nor is this the first time that Erdogan has pulled this sort of stunt in his 20-odd years in power. Most notably, Erdogan and the Turkish state staged a severe crackdown on the opposition in 2016, after an attempted military coup that was only foiled after Erdogan literally FaceTimed into a Turkish TV station to tell his supporters to take to the streets. Anyway, so why has Erdogan staged yet another crackdown? Well, assuming the charges are indeed politically motivated, which seems pretty likely, it's almost definitely because he feels threatened by İmamoğlu's popularity. While it's still a way off, İmamoğlu is currently the favourite to win the next Turkish presidential election, due for 2028. İmamoğlu has been helped by Turkey's ongoing inflationary crisis, largely a consequence of Erdogan's unorthodox monetary policy, which involved cutting rather than raising interest rates in the face of inflation. While Erdogan has since U-turned and is now raising rates, inflation is still running above 40% year on year, and many Turks have lost faith in Erdogan's ability to handle the economy, which actually used to be one of his electoral strengths. Anyway, while Erdogan can't run for a third term under the current constitution, he's presumably either planning to amend the constitution to run again, which would require a 2/3 majority in parliament, or he's worried that İmamoğlu will beat his anointed successor, whoever that ends up being. However, the timing of all this is interesting. After all, İmamoğlu's popularity has been apparent at least since last year's local elections. So why has Erdogan waited until now to get rid of him? Well, as we see it, there are at least 3 reasons. The first is Trump, who's clearly more willing to turn a blind eye to Erdogan's autocratic practices than Biden was. The second is Europe, which wants to stay on Erdogan's good side at the moment, because Turkey could be a useful addition to any independent European security project. For context, Turkey has one of the largest armies in NATO, a booming military-industrial complex, and has been a surprisingly vocal supporter of Ukraine so far. Erdogan is probably betting that, in this context, the EU will be less critical of its autocratic practices than they would usually be. But the third reason is the recent deal signed by Erdogan and Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader of the PKK. Öcalan recently called for the PKK to lay down its arms, presumably because Erdogan has offered some sort of political concessions to Turkey's Kurdish minorities, which he's expected to announce soon. The reason that this is relevant is that the CHP's main political ally are a Kurdish party called the People's Equality and Democracy Party, or DEM. Erdogan is presumably hoping that these concessions, or just the prospect of concessions, can convince them to keep quiet, with the implicit threat being that if they criticise Erdogan for his crackdown, Erdogan could either withdraw these concessions or collapse the peace process entirely, which he might then use as a pretext to actually reduce Kurdish political autonomy. Nonetheless, while it's probably true that the US, the EU, and the DEM will be less critical of this move than they would usually be in normal times, there are at least two big risks for Erdogan here. The first is political. In other words, Turkish voters see what's going on, and support for the CHP actually increases. But perhaps the more acute risk for Erdogan is economic. While Turkey's economy hasn't yet recovered from Erdogan's funky monetary experiment, in the past few years, investors have tentatively returned to the country, which has helped stem the decline of the lira. However, in the immediate aftermath of Imamoglu's detention, investors started pulling their cash straight back out. The lira fell from about 36 to the dollar to a record high of 38, and only stopped its decline because the Turkish central bank burnt through an estimated $10 billion worth of reserves protecting the currency. Turkish stocks dropped so abruptly that they twice triggered a trading halt, which is when exchanges just stopped selling altogether to try and stabilise the market, and Turkish borrowing costs, which are already pretty high, spiked on the news. If this restarts Turkey's economic crisis, Erdogan might have second thoughts. At TLDR News, we're always trying to help you learn more about the world around you. Luckily for us, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, shares this same commitment, with thousands of lessons in maths, science, programming, and AI. And not only that, but their interactive lessons teach you by doing, instead of just asking you to mindlessly memorize stuff. This helps you build your critical thinking skills and become a better thinker. For instance, Brilliant's newly updated maths courses help you establish a strong foundation in algebra. It then helps you build on this, teaching you how to conquer calculus, all while maintaining an emphasis on problem solving and reasoning. But the thing I like best about this is that their mathematical courses help you develop your mathematical intuition and fluency, skills that you can use in the real world. As we've told you before, data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR or click the QR code on screen. Or you can click the link in the description, and you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.